Hi there, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you all for joining. Welcome to another WinPeers weekly webinar. So we've still got some people joining here today, so we're just going to wade into it slowly. But Ben Cutler here, again, solution specialist with WinPeer. Appreciate everyone joining today. I'll be your host today. Keep in mind that following this webinar, anyone who registered will receive a link to my online calendar along with a link to the recording of this webinar once we've finished. Feel free to reach out, get in touch, put some time in the calendar if you'd like to speak one-on-one. Again, this is an address matching webinar today. It's an informal webinar. You know, if questions come up, I can take those real time. You know, so I'll keep my eyes on the question box. For those of you who might be new to GoToWebinar, if you take a look at the control panel, you should see a question box there. So feel free to submit any questions that you might have. But again, just wading into this as people are still joining today, and really appreciate everyone joining. Again, just as people are joining, my name is Ben Cutler, Solution Specialist here with WinPeer. Welcome back to another WinPeers weekly webinar. I'll be your host today. Again, anyone who registered for this webinar will receive an email with a link to the webinar, a recording of the webinar, along with a link to my online calendar once we finish up today. Again, I'll be taking real-time questions throughout the webinar. So feel free to submit those through the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel there as questions come up. And I really want to emphasize that because those questions are really useful for everyone on the webinar today, or anyone watching the recording of the webinar later. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Again, really appreciate everyone joining today. Really appreciate your interest and consideration. A quick personalized hello to a few that I did see registered, a few names I recognize, a few folks that I see on the call today, Josh, Greg, Peter, Helen, Larry, Brent, Gabby, Stephen, and everyone else for you know, some of those names that I don't recognize. Good to see you all. I hope you're all doing well today in the comfort of your own home. Please do me a big favor and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. That's a big help. Again, this is open for live questions along the way, so please feel free to submit those. Bit of company background here before we get started today. WinPeer, again, data quality software and solutions, founded in 2003, top rated worldwide, #1 on G2 Crowd. Today we're going to be looking at our clean and match software. We have this software available for budgets of just about any size. It's plug and play, no special skills are needed, typically very minimal training time, maybe an hour or two if any. We do have a free trial available on the website, and it's just 2 minutes to download and 2 minutes to install. So feel free to jump over to our website, winpeer.com, request a trial version, and you can start working with your data right away. So the format, the agenda of the webinar today, we're going to skip the slides. Again, this is informal. Encourage any questions along the way. We're going to start with a quick mention of some of the problems that we help to solve. We're going to move then to a 2-minute orientation, just a 2-minute overview of the software for anyone that might be new to the software. We're going to take a look at a simple example of address matching, and I've got a couple other examples queued up as well. So we can start with a simple example, we can move to you know, a medium level of complexity, and then something even more complex there. If we run over 30 minutes today, I'm happy to do so, especially if we have questions coming in and folks are engaged and watching. If anyone has to drop off at the 30-minute mark, feel free. Appreciate you all joining. So the typical problems that we're helping to solve, probably the most common word that's used these days is deduplication, data cleansing, right? But we're also, contributing to and often, a major component to, larger initiatives, and there's other keywords being used, some other use cases for the type of work that can be done within the software. Data integration, data migration, general data quality, data operations, master data management, merge purge, record linkage, single customer or single supplier view, single source of truth, 360 customer or 360 supplier view, data prep, address verification, batch and real-time solutions available for most of this, postal certification, email verification, and more. So get in touch if you have any questions here, but hopefully that helps to put things in context in terms of how we help our customers and our partners around the world. Let's start with just that 2-minute, that quick overview that I promised, so we can all start on the same page. And then from there, again, we'll start with a simple example, and then I've got a couple of other examples to share as well. So again, today we're looking at address matching. And if you think about address matching, I mean, it's a really common need. It's said that 80% of all data references locations or addresses or geographic data, things like that. So a lot of the times, you're matching an address along with a person name, or an address along with transaction details, or a product that's being purchased, or a company that you're selling to or you're buying from, and things like that. But again, when we look at data as a whole, the most common type of data are really those contact details, right? Phone, address, these days an email address, and things like that. So even looking, historically, and legacy data, address is one of the most common components that would ever be associated with any type of data worth storing. So it's a very, very common challenge. So let's go ahead and start with just the 2-minute quick overview here. So again, if you're new to the software, we want to make sure that we're all starting essentially on the same page here. If you take a look at the screen in front of you here, you're going to see our clean and match software. Again, you can find a trial on the website, winpeer.com. 2 minutes to download, 2 minutes to install, and you'll start here. If you look in the lower left-hand corner here, you'll see that primary workflow, which is data, clean, and match, right? So we also have a verify tab here for address verification, postal certification, geo coordinates, right? So really that address verification and enrichment, which is really important for something like address matching. I mean, it really gives you a big advantage. Also, our enterprise edition does have that automation module, but it's not something we're going to touch on today unless questions come up. So again, you've got your primary workflow here, which is data, clean, and match. And then if you look up top in the upper left here, you can see a secondary workflow. So from the data step, we have project, where we can create and save projects, open projects. We have import data, which is going to be your most common use at the data step. We can also export from this step. And if any questions come up, I'm happy to answer that. But we're going to focus on the import, right? Just as a part of this 2-minute overview. From the import step, it's very simple. And one of the biggest advantages here is you can easily mix and match data from different sources, different file types, different databases, right? So if we follow this over to the right, we have popular sources, but you can also kind of segment this by file types, database types, and CRMs. So again, one of the biggest advantages here is you can kind of mix and match and import data, and ultimately join data from different data sets, right? From different data sources, different data formats, and things like that. And it's very simple to do, right? It isn't much of a learning curve here. So for the first example, I'm just gonna import from Excel, but we'll come back to that first example after the overview. So again, down in the lower left here, we're going to move to clean, right? So we've covered the data step as part of this 2-minute overview. Next is the clean step. And what you'll want to know about the clean step is we've got 4 windows here: upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. The 2 on the left are windows for previewing data. You can ignore those for now. The 2 on the right are a bit more interactive, right? So down below in the lower right here, this is where you're going to be able to do some data profiling. Some refer to this as data interrogation or data sanity checks, right? To better understand the content and the structure of the data, right? I've got an anecdote on that later. Up top here is where we do our data cleansing, normalization, and standardization, right? There's quite a few data cleansing operations available to you. You can see the tabs up top here. And as I scroll over the tabs, you can see the explanation and a link to that section of the help file. So again, the learning curve here is really minimal, right? Typically, I spend an hour or 2 with my clients before and after the purchase. We've got lots of great content on YouTube. Again, please subscribe if you haven't already. We appreciate that. A great help file with lots of great examples. So typically the learning curve there is very minimal. So again, this is the clean step, right? For Windows, 2 on the left for previewing data. Lower right here is going to be for data quality statistics, data quality profiling. Up top here, we have data cleansing, normalization, and standardization, right? So that's the clean step. Match step here. Again, if we look in the upper left here, we can see we have match configuration, matched result, and matched report. And for this 2-minute overview here, I'm just going to touch on the configuration. Once we actually get started with some real-life examples, we'll take a look at results, and happy to look at the report if anybody has any questions on that. From the match step here, again at the configuration step, it's very simple. So for beginners, it's really just a 3-step process, and there's not much of a learning curve here at all. But for more advanced use cases and more advanced users, it is very configurable, right? And there's a lot more explanation and plenty of ways to kind of tweak or configure the way that the matching works, right? So what are we doing at this step? Matching data. We're configuring the rules for matching data. So if you look just to the right here, you can see in blue lettering, step 1, just to the right of that, step 2, and then just to the right of that, step 3, right? So we're going to work left to right here through the match configuration step. So step 1 is select your tables. Step 2, select columns to match. And step 3 is create the match definition, right? And so we'll look more at that in the examples here. But again, for beginners, this is very simple, right? So it doesn't take much learning. Again, if you want to get started with a trial version of the software, winpeer.com, you can download and install that very quickly and easily. So that's the 2-minute overview here. Let's look at some real life examples here of address matching. Right, we're going to start with a simple example. So back to data, again, up to import. We're going to import from Excel. And we're going to start with a simple example here. So source 1, and again, just a few records here from each source. That way, everything is very easy to understand. Again, simple matching, source 2, we're going to import that as well. So if you've been keeping up with, some of these webinars, the series, previously we looked at people matching, and some of these examples are structured fairly similarly, right? We're going to start with a simple example and later look at some more complex examples. And this first example here is really straightforward, and it is very simple. And your bulletproof solution to something like this is really going to be the fuzzy matching, right? We're going to start with that. So if you take a look here, again, between these two sources here, we're doing some address matching, and the addresses are very similar, right? On this side, we've got 805 Veterans, BLVD, comma, Redwood City. Looks pretty clean. CA, that's abbreviated for California. We've got a full 9-digit zip code here, followed by an abbreviated country. And it looks pretty much the same on this side here. So this looks like pretty clean data here. On this side, it doesn't look so clean. If we take a look here, we're kind of missing a space here. We're missing a zip code. If we look down below, we've got some casing issues. But all in all, it looks pretty straightforward. It doesn't look too bad. You know, when we think about addresses and why they don't match, there are quite a few different, reasons why addresses don't match. Right? You think about this in detail. Well, addresses are just longer lines of less structured text, right? So these are descriptions of a location. And those descriptions inherently are always going to be very unique, from, let's just say, source to source, right? Those address descriptions are always going to be very unique. And those minor differences, such as casing, like we see here, missing information and things like that, those minor differences are going to make it more difficult to match. You're certainly not going to be able to do something like this very quickly or very accurately in Excel or using other means and methods. So spelling differences and things like that, all those minor differences are going to be issues. Because again, what we're dealing with are descriptions that are inherently going to be very unique. Other issues when we talk about addresses, we've got partial addresses where we're missing information, or it's incomplete information. And you see an example here, right? We're missing the postal code altogether on both addresses on this source too, right? If you look more in detail, again, we've got even some differences just in the address descriptions, right? In the street suffixes, right? Here it's BLVD, here it's street, right? So again, these minor differences make this work more difficult. Makes it almost impossible to do without a tool or a solution or software that is built to do this kind of work. And again, Clean and Match software was. So we're going to make this easy. But again, trying to do something like this in Excel or using other means, doing kind of VLOOKUPs and things like that, you're not going to be able to do this work quickly, and you're not going to be able to do this work accurately, right? And that's especially important these days. Other reasons why addresses won't match, just the structuring or the formatting of the addresses. So a simple example of structuring and formatting is you've got one source with 2 address fields and the other source with 4 address fields, right? That's going to make the scenario that much more difficult. Also, misfielded address parts where you've got a city in a state column and vice versa, right? So, a lot of different issues here. We've got also, issues of multiple addresses, right? Where you might have billing, shipping, mailing addresses. Obviously, we all move throughout our lifetime, and businesses have multiple offices, multiple locations, and change addresses every once in a while. So, dealing with multiple addresses or old addresses and things like that. So, a lot of different issues that make address matching a challenge, right? So, we're going to look at several of those examples throughout these 3 examples here. And I can see here we've got some other people that joined a little late today. So again, thank you everyone for joining. I'm not going to go through the entire introduction again, but thank you for joining. We appreciate it. My name is Ben Cutler with WinPeer Solution Specialist. I'm your host today. This is an informal webinar, so feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar using the question box. I'll try to keep my eye on that and answer questions as questions come up. Speaking of which, a quick pause here. We do have a couple of questions that came in. Step 2, can you swap address lines? Yes, probably. Christina, thank you for the question. Just so I fully understand the question, can you clarify on that what you mean by swapping address lines? I think we probably can. I just want to make sure that I fully understand. So I'll keep my eye on that and try to come back to it, maybe using this example. Okay, so great. Hey, no problem. Thank you everyone for joining again. Question box there. Feel free to submit those questions. Again, we've got 3 examples today of address matching. We're on that first example, so for those of you just joining, you haven't necessarily missed much more than an introduction. So again, we've got 2 different data sources on the screen here, different issues, data quality issues that make this difficult to match, but this is a very simple example. So in this specific example, we don't necessarily need to pull out our entire tool belt and look at things too closely, right? So for this first example, it's pretty straightforward, and we're just going to show you how fuzzy matching can help you with this type of scenario. The next example is going to be a bit more complex. We're going to use some of our other tools, followed by a third example as well. Again, keep in mind this webinar is likely to run over the 30-minute mark, and happy to do so to get through all of these examples, especially if folks are engaged and have some questions along the way. So again, in this example, I'm going to go ahead and skip the clean step, right? We already took that 2-minute overview. So we know what we can do at the clean step, some of the things there. I've got a quick clarification on that question. So let me go ahead and try to take this here. If your address lines are parsed, street in address 1 and secondary in address 2, and you have some records with that order reversed, will you catch matches like apartment 1, 42 Main Street, and 42 Main Street apartment 1? Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we're going to look at that in our third example here. So hang tight, and we'll get to that in the third example, if you can. Otherwise, again, you'll get a link to the recording, and you can go back to us. You can watch that, but I am going to cover that in the third example. That's a great example. It's one of the more advanced scenarios. So great question. So again, in this simple scenario here, we're going to start with some fuzzy matching. Again, we've got a variety of different, differences between these addresses. Ultimately, 2 sources, 2 records from each source, 2 addresses from each source. So we should end up with 2 groups of 2 matching records, right? So we're gonna go ahead and follow this through on the match configuration. Again, step 1, select sources. Step 2, select columns to match. In these sources, we've just got addresses, so we're gonna go ahead and double click here. We're gonna move it over here. We're gonna try that at 90. We might need to reduce that threshold to be able to find those matches. We're gonna click on start match here, and we're gonna get some very quick results. Yeah, we've got quite a few differences there, right? So at 90, we were not able to find those as matching records here. But as soon as we take that level down, we're going to be able to find those 2 groups of matching addresses, right? So again, this fuzzy matching is very configurable. It's very, very powerful. It's the most powerful tool you have in your toolkit. It's not going to solve all problems, right? Which is why we're going to look at some more complex examples and take a look at splitting and normalization and noise removal and things like that. But the fuzzy matching, and the levels and the way that we can configure the matching is probably your most powerful component within the software that way. So again, even with all of those differences, matching street to Ave, casing differences, missing information, entire, 9-digit zip codes missing, and things like that, we're able to go ahead and find those matching records there. So it's pretty straightforward, right? Again, we've got some much more complex examples. So that's pretty straightforward. Let me just take a quick look here at the questions. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and jump back to data. Again, if we have any questions about that, that's great, but I think more questions will come up in some of the more complex examples. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next example here. So again, essentially an intermediate level of complexity, right? The medium complexity here, source 1 and source 2. And so again, in these examples, we're still just dealing with two sources, right? A lot of the times you're dealing with 3, 5, 10 sources, and not 2 records or 4 records, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. So obviously this can be much more complex. We've got source 1. Let's go ahead and bring in source 2. And let's take a quick look here before we actually start applying rules, right? Let's understand, what the differences are. Why is this going to be challenging before we start applying some rules? Before we start trying to actually solve the problem, right? So source 1 and source 2. On source 1, it looks, very similar, if not the exact same as what we had in the earlier example, right? Very clean, very standardized, very complete addresses. In source 2, we've actually got a different structure, right? So when we talk about some of the different examples of why addresses can be difficult to match, this was one of those. And not only is it a different structure altogether, where, again, structure, I have a single column here, and structure, I have, the data all parsed out here. Not only that, but again, we're missing information, where this side contains state information, this side doesn't, right? If we look at this more in depth, again, we've got the word street here. Again, we've got an abbreviated word for boulevard on this side. Avenue written out, avenue abbreviated. Let's take a look at the zip codes here. We've got 5-digit zip codes on this side. We've got consistently 9-digit zip codes on this side, and an abbreviation for the country here, right? So this is a medium level of complexity, and it's one of a variety of different examples. Again, data is it's really a can of worms, right? So you almost never know what to expect. But this is a good example, right? This is not the example from earlier about swapping address lines. We're going to get to that actually in the third example, so hang tight for that. But this is really more looking at different structures, different formats, different descriptions or different address parts like the street suffixes, and missing and partial information, right? And trying to match up that data there. So in this scenario, we are going to go to the clean step, right? And a quick anecdote about the clean step and about the data profiling, right? So, in these examples, we're working with just, 2, 4, a handful of records of data, and we're kind of explaining it. We're looking at the data. We're eyeballing the data. But again, when you're, you're working with, large lists and databases, and, again, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of records, you're not going to be eyeballing that data, right? Which is the importance of, data profiling, to better understand the content and the structure of the data to the best of your ability in, as little time as possible. You might refer to that as data interrogation or data sanity checks, right? And you think about the importance of this, and it's really key here because, putting this into context, would you buy a home without a home inspection, right? Would you buy a car without a vehicle inspection? Would schools admit new students without, having some information on, the students' historical, behavior and academic performance, right? And, can it be done? Yeah, probably. Is it responsible? Probably not. And, what should you do and how much time should you put into it? You've really got to use your best judgment, right? We talk about and we think about, data quality. And, I think, the question exists, whose job is it, right? And, a common attitude is, it is what it is, and there's not much, we can really do about it. But here's the thing, if you're watching these webinars, you're probably at least partially responsible for the quality of the data. And also for raising your hand if there are problems existing in the data, especially if, identifying those data quality problems can help fix upstream issues, or if correcting those problems will help to ensure better business outcomes. So here's the good news. You know, our software solutions, they're not very expensive at all. They're built for budgets of all sizes. They're easy to use, simple to implement, and they can help you to quickly and easily solve those problems. So again, the data quality profiling here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, this is very powerful to help you to better understand the content and the quality of the structure of very large data sets, really at a very high level, right? Or to, you know, from a bird's eye view, so to speak. But we're going to skip by this today because again, we're looking at the data, we're talking through the issues, right? So again, from this clean step here, I'm going to take a quick look at questions. Okay. From this clean step here, there's a few different things that I want to do to be able to work with this data, right? Again, if we look down in the lower left here, we're just kind of reminded of some of those structuring issues, right? So the first thing that I'm going to do here for the problem that we have of having different structures is I'm going to do some splitting. I'm going to do some splitting of this, and that's very simple to do with just a check of the box. I'm going to show you that in a minute. I also want to make sure that everybody understands that we can also do kind of the opposite, and we can merge the information on this side. So just as easily as we can split information here, we could also merge the information here to a single column, right? So there's different approaches to this, and you know, one approach is not necessarily better than the other approach in all scenarios, right? You might want to do both. So for splitting, we're going to look at source one, and then up top here, we're going to click on split. And then again, this is very simple. We're going to split an address. If you look here, again, just if you scroll over the split, you can see the explanation there and a link to that section of the help file. We've got some great examples there. But you can see here right out of the box, we can split people names, city, state, zip, and some other things here. We also support regular expressions for customized rules around splitting and parsing, right? So it's very, very powerful stuff. But you know, we're splitting an address, and it's very simple. I'm just going to check the box here as best practice. I'm also going to run clean, and then if we look down below, we've got a very similar structure to what we have on this side, right? A very, very similar structure, right? We follow this over to the right. We can also see not only are we structuring the data, but we're also doing some word standardization or normalization of those word variations, those street suffixes and things like that. So go ahead and do some of your own testing and look at how that's working for you. So it's not just a structuring where we're, you know, again, we're structuring cities into a city column and states into a state column, and you know, house number or building number into its own column, but we're also doing some word standardization there as well, and working with abbreviations and things like that. So once I've done the splitting here, and which has also done the normalization of word variations, it's also allowing me to remove noise from the original column of data here, right? If we take a look at this original column, there is what you might consider to be noise in this column, essentially words, abbreviations, numbers, you know, text or characters that don't help us find a match on this. So once I've done all of this, I can go ahead and just apply fuzzy matching with some of the newly structured data here, right? Again, quick example, how would I merge this? I can go ahead and say, look, we're going to go ahead and merge this information just as it exists. We're going to give it an order. Right, pretty simple stuff, run clean. And so what was original, now we have all of this data merged, and we can match this against this, right? So two different ways to do that, splitting and merging, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Now we can move over to the match step here. And again, this is a medium level of complexity, right? We can split, merge, shift data, standardize data, word variations, and things like that. All of that can be done to help you to find matches. So in this scenario here, what would I do? I would take that original address from source one, I'd map it to the merge column on source two. We'd go ahead and add that as a single group, right? A single match definition, so to speak. We'll do it at 90%, maybe 85, just because we know we've got some significant difference there. Add group, and then we're also going to work with the parse data here. So here I want to go ahead and use the street number to street number, street name to street, and city to city, and state to state, right? So for the second example here, I would probably do something like this, right? So it's going to look for a match this way or look for a match this way, right? So a little bit of kind of data understanding, right? Data interrogation, so to speak. Some quick cleansing, normalization, very simple. And then just a little bit of thought in terms of the way that we're setting this up at the match configuration step. And we can start matching here. And we find our matches here, right? 4 in at the data step. You know, if we take a look here, again, 2 here and 2 here, right? 4 in and 4 found, right? 4 out, so to speak, right? So pretty simple stuff. Again, medium level of complexity that way. Let me take a quick look here, see if we have any questions coming in. Okay, great. Great, let's go ahead and move on to that more complex example. So again, this is the third example, 3 of 3. And a question came up earlier, which is if your address lines are parsed, street information in address 1 and secondary information in address 2, and you have some records with that order reversed, will you catch matches like apartment number 1, 42 Main Street, against something that is written in the reverse, which would be 42 Main Street, apartment number 1? And yeah, the question is yes. So we're going to look at an example of that. It's actually a bit more complex, but the first thing is the splitting that we saw in that last example. A lot of the times that's going to be your silver bullet, bulletproof type of solutions for that example, because it's going to allow you to apply that address splitting to multiple columns, and it's going to do its best to parse that out into the columns where the data belongs. So that will be probably your first attempt at something like that. Now I'm going to show you something that actually takes that example and makes it a bit more complex even. So let's go ahead and take a look at this next example here. So in this next example, instead of 2 records from each source, we're actually going to have 4 records from each source. And those 4 records are very similar in some ways and less similar in others. Right, so let's go ahead and import the data. And let's import this second sheet. And let's talk through what we need to know about this example. So a lot of the times, again, thinking back to what we mentioned earlier, 80% of data is referencing some kind of location or address. And so a lot of the times you're not just matching addresses like we've been doing thus far. A lot of the times you're matching address and people names, or address and company names, or address and events, or services, or product descriptions and things like that, right? There's a lot of different possibilities there. So a lot of the times, but you're not just thinking about addresses, but you're also thinking about people names and some of the different reasons why people names don't match, or company names and why company names don't match, some of those things that we've covered on previous webinars there. But in this scenario, it's actually pretty interesting, right? So let's take a look through this. On source 1, we have Ann Jones and Marie Jones, and then they're at 2 different addresses. And if you notice here, in 2 different states, right? So 2 very similar names. Addresses are very different, and the states are obviously telling us that these are probably 2 different people. Ultimately, it's hard to be sure unless we have a social security number, an insurance number, or something along those lines. But with the information that we have, these look like they're probably 2 people. Same thing down below. 2 very similar names at 2 very different addresses, and if we look at the states, they're very different. So with the information that we have, we can assume that these are 2 different people, right? And so that is going to add a level of complexity to what we're doing here, right? That in itself is a level of complexity, because if we're matching addresses and people names in this scenario, and addresses are different, but people names are very similar, it's something that, you know, we kind of need to understand. We need to understand that the possibility exists, right? If we look at source 2 here, and so again, Ann Jones, Anne Marie Jones, one in Wisconsin, one in California. If we look at source 2 here, we've got a whirl of problems, right? Look at this in detail. Look at the scenario in detail. You know, we've got you know, different name structures, even some abbreviations here, and we've got 2 sets of addresses on this side. So not just a single address, but we've got a shipping address and a billing address. So it's 2 different addresses essentially for the same person, right? So again, it's an added level of complexity, and we see this quite often. You know, what is very common about this, it is more complex, it's a more advanced concept, but what is very common about this is the difference in structure, and even essentially what we're going to need to do here is match one to many, meaning one address from this side and try to find it in 2 different places on this side, right? So this is a good example for that question that came up about having address parts in different columns, right? And again, that split function that I showed you earlier, that's going to work really well for that. Also, address verification. Address verification, you can see it here. This is currently only available in the enterprise editions. We're going to be rolling this out as kind of a pay-as-you-go service in the small business and business pro editions. Address verification is also a kind of a more bulletproof type of solution for something like that. But some of the things that we're going to look at now are also going to be useful as well. So let's take a look here. Again, in this scenario, I'm going to do some splitting of names. I could also use our knowledge base library for to handle nicknames, right? It's another name problem, but we're not going to look at that today. We're going to focus more on addresses. I'm also going to do some splitting here, and I'm going to copy the address data from this column so that I can match the original and the copy. So essentially I have 2 versions of that address to match against the 2 versions of the address on this side, right? So I'll show you what that looks like here. Other things worth mentioning, you know, a lot of the same issues as we had previously, you know, different structures, different address parts or word variations, missing and partial information and things like that. Again, missing zip codes and things like that. Here we don't have a state information at all, casing issues and things like that. So really all of the same issues that we've looked at previously, plus some additional complexity here, right? So hopefully this will be useful. And we'll try to finish this up here in the next 5 minutes or so, answer any questions that come in and let you all get back to your day. So again, we're going to move to the clean step here. And again, we've got the 2 sources of data. So I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to start with name splitting and address splitting, right? So let's start again with splitting. And again, we can split names very quickly and easily, right? Run clean, and you can see how the names have been split up, right? That's going to be helpful for us later, right? And then again on the address, I'm going to go ahead and split the address. So I'm going to use the address splitting on the address. And again, similarly to that question that came up about you know, address parts being misfielded, essentially is the way that I refer to that. You know, having, you know, kind of the values reversed. Again, this is going to be a very good solution for that. So feel free to do some testing. But again, I've taken this address and I've split it into more reliable columns here, into address parts. I've also done some address standardization or word standardization here. That's just right out of the box. It'll do that for you. On this side, again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do some splitting here, right? I'm not going to get into the why, but I'm going to go ahead and do some name splitting. And for the addresses, again, I'm also going to do some splitting here. I'm going to go ahead and split the address information that I have here. This information is always already split. I could also join it, or merge it like we looked at in the last example. I'm going to try to keep the example short here, and I'm just going to do some splitting here. So shipping address and splitting, run clean, and take a quick look. The address has been split for us, right? Now I mentioned copying the address data here, right? I mentioned copying this. So I'm not going to copy this. I am going to copy this information, right? So I have essentially 2 copies to work with. So I can match 2 from this side to 2 to this side, right? And so again, I'm going to use the copy column. And just real quickly and easily here, I'm going to copy this one and street name and city and state, right? So now I have 2 copies on this side. Now the data has been quickly and easily cleansed, standardized, normalized, transformed, and we can go ahead and set up some match rules here. So back to match, choose my sources, name to name, yes, that's good, but I'm actually going to work with the name component. So I'm going to use the last name instead of the full name, right? I could go ahead and use the full name, that's fine, but I'm going to choose to work with the last name. So let's go find the last name. We're going to add that, 90%. Oh, you know what? I actually want to add more to that. So last name, and you know what? I want to do some mapping here as well. So on the copy, I want to map that to my billing number. And again, on the copy here, billing street, and copy here to my billing city, right? Why did I do that? Again, well, you know, we're working with, you know, 1 address on one source and 2 addresses on the other source here. And, you know, it's misfielded, right? So, you know, on one hand, I'm going to go ahead on this first group. I'm going to bring in just the, let's just say the original data, so to speak. So I'm going to do and street number and, you know, maybe the street name and, you know, the city. And then down here, I'm going to do again the last name and the copies, right? Number, name, and city, right? Now I don't know if 80 is going to work or if we need to do this at 85. So I'm just going to go ahead and just pull everything down to 85 so that way this doesn't run longer than it needs to. So a quick example here, and you can see 4 groups of matching records. That's exactly what we were hoping to see. Again, on source 1, we've got 2 different people, you know, seemingly, you know, very similar names, but at 2 very different addresses. And then again, another 2 very seemingly similar names, but at 2 very different addresses in 2 very different states, right? So 4 on this side and then 4 on this side. And then the, you know, a big challenge here is that on this side, you know, the addresses from this side were sometimes going to match these and sometimes going to match these. And what we just did in about 5 minutes was solve that problem. And we have 4 groups of matching records here. Now, the columns that we use for matching are highlighted here, and we use quite a few. So if you want to just take a look at this quick before we finish up the example and take any last questions today, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put all of these columns next to each other so we can just validate kind of what happened here, right? How did that work? Why did it work so well? Well, let's take a look. A street name and street number, right? So if you look at this, last names are matching. Then if you look at street numbers, again, we did this essentially with kind of the original and a copy. So here it matches, here it doesn't, but that's sufficient, right? It's a minimum level of similarity, right? We use 2 different match groups. So here it matches, here it matches, here it matches, and here it matches. If we look over to the street name, here it matches, here it matches, here it matches, here it matches, right? Again, cities, those lined up pretty well across the board. We were missing a city on one side, so we got the state instead of the city. So very, very powerful stuff. I hope this example was useful for everyone. And some of the examples that came before that, John, thank you for the comment here. And again, I'm going to take any last questions that come up before the end of the webinar, but going to wrap up here today. Really appreciate everyone joining. Hopefully this was really helpful. John, to answer your questions, we do this every week. You know, occasionally we've got, you know, some breaks in between and things like that. But we do host these webinars every week. Feel free to get in touch. You know, we're always happy to help. You know, we can set up a one-on-one. You'll get an email from me after this webinar. That'll include a link to my online calendar. Feel free just to schedule some time. And, you know, that invitation goes out to, you know, any of our customers, partners around the world. You know, feel free to pick any available time on the calendar, but also to anyone looking at the software. You know, there's a lot of very advanced concepts here. You know, data matching, record linkage, deduplication. These are really sciences, right? The software is very simple to use. You know, it's a minimal investment. You know, we've got plenty of training material. You know, things like that. It's very visual, intuitive. But the data matching, the record linkage, that's where, you know, things get really difficult. So that's one of the reasons why we host these webinars. And really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today. Really appreciate it. I don't see any new questions here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And again, you'll get a link to the recording, a link to my online calendar. Please subscribe to us on webinar. On YouTube if you haven't already. Otherwise, it's winpeer.com if you'd like some additional information. But thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your week.